Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us get back to our main character. It all began on a rainy Thursday evening when Emily Carter stood outside a downtown law office, clutching a thin folder to her chest. Her umbrella had flipped inside out, her shoes were soaked, and her future felt as uncertain as the storm above her. The rent was overdue, her mother's medical bills were piling higher each week, and the small flower shop where she worked was about to close for good. That was when a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. The door opened, and out stepped Alexander Hayes, the young CEO of Hayes International. Everyone in the city knew his name, but Emily never imagined she would see him this close, let alone hear him say the words that would change her life. His tone was calm but deliberate. "Miss Carter," he said, "I have a proposal for you." She blinked through the rain, confused. "A proposal?" He handed her an envelope, the paper sealed with the silver Hayes crest. "A business arrangement," he continued. "I need someone to act as my wife. In return, every debt you owe will disappear. Consider it a contract, nothing more." The world seemed to tilt beneath her feet. Emily stared at him, water dripping from her hair. "You cannot be serious," she whispered. Alexander met her gaze without flinching. "Completely serious. You will attend 5 public events with me, live at my estate for the duration of our agreement, and follow a few simple rules. No real affection, no questions about my past, and no breaking the contract before the gala next month." He paused, his voice lowering slightly. "Do this, and your mother's treatment will be fully covered." Emily's heart pounded. It sounded impossible, even absurd, but desperation had a way of dulling reason. She looked at the envelope again, at her reflection shimmering in the wet glass behind him. This was madness, yet it was the only door left open. "Why me?" she asked quietly. Alexander's jaw tightened. "Because you have nothing to gain by pretending, and I need someone who will not fall in love." For a long moment, the rain filled the silence between them. Then Emily took the envelope. "When do we start?" she said. A faint smile crossed his lips, the first trace of warmth in his otherwise distant expression. "Tomorrow morning," he replied. "My driver will pick you up at 8. Bring only what you need." As the car pulled away, Emily stood frozen on the sidewalk, the envelope clutched against her chest. The city lights blurred behind the rain, and she realized her life had just been rewritten with one impossible sentence: "Marry me like a contract." What she did not know was that this contract would test every belief she had about love, pride, and the price of trust. The next morning arrived gray and cold. Emily barely slept, her thoughts spinning around the impossible deal she had accepted. At exactly 8 o'clock, a sleek black car stopped in front of her apartment. The driver, polite and expressionless, opened the back door and said, "Miss Carter, Mr. Hayes is waiting." Inside, the car smelled faintly of leather and cedar. Emily held the envelope close to her chest, feeling the weight of the contract that had already changed her life. When they reached the Hayes estate, her breath caught. The mansion stretched across acres of manicured gardens, every window gleaming like glass diamonds in the morning sun. She had never seen anything like it. The driver led her through high iron gates and into a marble-floored foyer where Alexander Hayes stood waiting, dressed in a dark suit that looked like it belonged in a magazine. "Good morning, Miss Carter," he greeted, his voice calm but firm. "I trust you understand what today means." She nodded, her throat dry. "Yes, I do." He handed her a pen and opened the contract on a polished oak table. "These are the terms we discussed. Read them carefully. There will be no second draft." Emily's eyes scanned the pages. Clause 1: Maintain the appearance of a loving marriage in public. Clause 2: Attend all social functions listed in the schedule. Clause 3 No real emotional involvement. Clause 4 No questions about personal history. Clause 5 The agreement ends the day after the charity gala. She hesitated, then looked up at him. And if either of us breaks a rule? Alexander's expression did not change. The contract is void, and all benefits are withdrawn. Her pulse quickened, but she signed. The pen trembled slightly in her hand, the ink still glistening when she set it down. Welcome to your new life, Mrs. Hayes, he said quietly. The words felt strange, unreal. He led her down the hall to a grand room filled with racks of elegant clothing, each tagged with her name. You will need to look the part, he said. There is a stylist arriving shortly. Tonight, we attend our first event together. Emily's stomach nodded. What kind of event? A dinner with the board of directors, he replied. They expect my wife to be there. Hours later, the stylist fussed over her hair and makeup, transforming her from a tired florist into someone who looked like she belonged in the glossy magazines stacked on the coffee table. When Alexander returned to check on her, even he paused for a second. You clean up well, he said, his voice softer than usual. Emily managed a nervous smile. I hope I remember which fork to use. For the first time, a trace of humor flickered in his eyes. Just follow my lead. That evening, as their car glided through the city, Emily stared out at the glowing skyline. Her reflection in the tinted glass looked like someone who belonged beside a man like Alexander Hayes. The dinner was held at an exclusive restaurant overlooking the bay. Waiters moved silently between tables as chandeliers glittered overhead. Alexander's hand brushed hers briefly as they walked in, a gesture meant for the cameras, but the contact sent a shiver through her all the same. At the table, he introduced her with perfect ease. Everyone, this is my wife, Emily. His tone was effortless, convincing. No one would have guessed the truth behind the polished smiles. Emily did her best to play along, laughing at the right moments, nodding when spoken to. She could feel eyes on her curious, appraising, but Alexander's steady presence beside her kept her grounded. During dessert, one of the board members leaned toward her and asked, So, Mrs. Hayes, how did you two meet? Emily froze, her mind blank. Alexander smoothly interjected, at a charity auction. She outbid me for a painting I wanted. The table laughed, and Emily followed with a shy smile. When the dinner finally ended, they returned to the mansion in silence. The night air was cool, filled with the scent of rain and roses. As Alexander held the door for her, she whispered, You saved me back there. He looked at her for a long moment before replying, Get used to it. From now on, we protect each other, at least in public. Something in his tone made her chest tighten, not with fear but with something unfamiliar, respect, maybe even gratitude. Later that night, as she stood alone in her new room, surrounded by luxury she could not comprehend, Emily opened the drawer of her bedside table. Inside lay the pen she had used to sign the contract. She picked it up, running her thumb along the smooth surface, and whispered to herself, This is not love. This is business. Yet deep down, she was not entirely sure she believed it anymore. Days turned into weeks, and Emily learned the rhythm of her new life inside the grand Hayes mansion. Each morning began with breakfast served by staff who moved like shadows, polite but distant. Alexander was often already dressed for meetings, his phone pressed to his ear, his tone clipped and precise. At first, their interactions were formal, almost mechanical. She was the contract wife who played her role, he was the man who had built walls so high that even kindness had trouble getting through. But somewhere between rehearsed smiles and shared silence, something began to shift. One afternoon, Emily stood on the terrace overlooking the gardens, the wind teasing her hair. She heard Alexander behind her, his voice softer than usual. You did well last night, he said. The board was impressed. She turned to face him. You mean they did not realize their CEO hired a stranger to be his wife? His eyes narrowed, but not in anger. You are sharper than you let people believe. Maybe I had to be, she replied quietly. Life does not go easy on those who are naive. For a moment, neither spoke. The tension between them felt different, less cold, more alive. That evening, they attended a charity gala, one of the events listed in the contract. Cameras flashed as they stepped out of the car. Alexander's hand rested lightly at her waist, guiding her through the crowd. To everyone watching, they were the picture of elegance. Inside the ballroom, crystal chandeliers glowed, and the orchestra played soft jazz. Emily forced herself to breathe steadily. She was supposed to look composed, not like a florist pretending to belong among diamonds and champagne. During the auction, the host announced, "Our next item, a rare painting from the early 20th century, starting bid, $50,000. Emily nearly gasped, but Alexander leaned close and whispered, "Smile. Remember the story we told them." His breath brushed her ear, and for a second she forgot the crowd. Then, in a moment of impulse, she raised her paddle. The room turned. 100,000, she said clearly. A murmur rippled through the audience. Alexander's lips twitched, almost a smile. He raised his paddle next. 150. The host's hammer struck. Sold, to Mr. Hayes. Applause filled the air. Emily blushed as Alexander turned toward her. "You just cost me a painting," he said under his breath. "I thought I was playing my part," she answered, eyes shining with mischief. "You did," he admitted. "Too well." On the drive home, the silence between them was not uncomfortable. The city lights reflected across the car window, and for once Alexander was not scrolling through his phone. "Why do you do all this?" Emily asked suddenly. "The galas, the smiles, the image?" He exhaled slowly. "My father built this company with his name, not his heart. When he passed, I inherited both his fortune and his enemies. People watch for weakness. A family image keeps them at bay." His words lingered, heavy but honest. "So, I am your shield," she said quietly. "For now," he replied. When they reached the mansion, rain began to fall again, soft and steady. Emily stepped out first, her heels clicking against the wet stone. Alexander followed, and for a brief second, she slipped. His hand caught hers before she could fall. The contact sent a jolt through both of them. "Careful," he murmured, his voice barely above the rain. "You are under contract, remember? I cannot let my investment get hurt." Emily looked up at him, her heart racing. "Investment," she repeated with a hint of defiance. "Is that all I am to you?" His jaw tightened, but he did not answer. Instead, he released her hand and walked ahead. That night, Emily could not sleep. She sat by the window, watching the raindrops trace lines down the glass. Somewhere deep inside, she realized she was no longer sure which parts of their marriage were pretend. The next morning, Alexander joined her for breakfast for the first time. He read the paper in silence until he spoke without looking up. "There is a corporate retreat this weekend. It will be different from the usual events. More private. You will come." She hesitated. "Is it in the contract?" He folded the paper and looked at her. "It is now." His tone carried no room for argument, but something in his eyes, something faint and unguarded, made her nod. She did not know it yet, but that weekend would change everything, because sometimes pretending long enough makes the heart forget what was real and what was not. The weekend arrived sooner than Emily expected. The car ride to the Hayes retreat house took nearly 3 hours, winding through the mountains before reaching a secluded estate surrounded by pine trees and the sound of rushing water. The place felt worlds away from the polished marble halls of the city mansion. When they arrived, Alexander seemed more relaxed than she had ever seen him. He wore no tie, his sleeves rolled up, and the usual sharpness in his voice softened. "Welcome to Pinehaven," he said simply. "We will be here for a few days with a few investors and their families. Try to look comfortable, not perfect." Emily nodded, half amused, half nervous. Inside, the cabin was breathtaking, filled with warm wood tones, large windows, and the smell of burning cedar. Later that afternoon, she found Alexander outside near the lake, standing alone with his hands in his pockets, watching the sunlight reflect off the water. For the first time, he looked almost peaceful. "It is beautiful here," she said, stepping closer. "My father used to bring me here when I was young," he replied without turning. "Back then, business did not exist. It was just us, fishing and burning marshmallows. Before everything became complicated." She smiled softly. "Sounds like you miss it." "Maybe I miss who I was," he admitted. Emily hesitated, then said quietly, "You could still find that version of yourself, you know." He looked at her then, and the intensity in his eyes made her heart stumble. "Maybe I already have," he said. Before she could respond, voices echoed from the house, calling them to dinner. That night, they sat at a long wooden table with the other guests. Emily noticed how different Alexander was in this environment. He laughed easily, spoke less formally, even poured wine for her himself. One of the investors, an older woman named Margaret, smiled across the table. "You two make a lovely couple," she said warmly. "It is rare to see real affection these days." Alexander met Emily's gaze and, without breaking eye contact, reached for her hand. The touch was light but steady, and the simple gesture sent warmth flooding through her. "Thank you," he replied. "I am lucky to have her." The words were meant for show, but they carried a weight neither of them could ignore. Later that night, as the others retired, Emily stepped out onto the deck. The air was crisp, stars scattered across the sky like powdered glass. She heard the door open behind her. "Could not sleep either?" Alexander asked, joining her. "Too quiet," she admitted with a small laugh. He handed her a mug of tea. "You did well tonight," he said. "You made them believe." She smiled faintly. "Sometimes I think I am starting to believe it too." The silence that followed was soft, unspoken, and full of something new. Then, thunder rumbled in the distance, and a light rain began to fall. They stayed under the awning, close enough that she could feel his warmth. "I was wrong about you," Alexander said suddenly. "I thought you were fragile, someone who needed saving. But you are not. You are the strongest person in the room, even when you think no one sees it." Emily's breath caught. "And what about you?" she asked. "What do you need?" He looked at her, his voice low. "Maybe the same thing you do. Someone to remind me I am still human." The rain fell harder, and for a moment it felt like the world had narrowed down to the sound of their breaths and the space between them. His hand lifted as if to brush a drop of water from her cheek, but he stopped himself halfway. The hesitation spoke louder than words. "Good night, Emily," he said finally, turning to leave. She stood there long after he was gone, her heart echoing with the words he had not said. The next morning, as they prepared to leave, Alexander was back to his composed, distant self. On the drive home, neither spoke much, yet something invisible hung in the air between them. When they reached the city, Emily glanced at him and said softly, "You do not have to pretend all the time, Alexander." His eyes met hers briefly before turning away. "Neither do you," he replied. That night, alone in her room, Emily looked at her reflection and realized that the lines between contract and connection were fading faster than she could stop them. What had started as business was becoming something far more dangerous, something that felt real. The following weeks passed quietly, yet something unspoken had begun to bloom between Emily and Alexander. Their routines changed in small ways that neither of them acknowledged. He started joining her for breakfast, listening to her stories about flowers and customers from her old shop. She began learning the rhythms of his world, how he handled pressure, how his jaw tightened before a board meeting, how his silence was never anger but a storm he carried inside. One evening, after another long day at the company, Alexander walked into the kitchen instead of his office. Emily was there in a simple sweater, stirring soup on the stove. The smell of rosemary filled the air. "You cook?" he asked, genuinely surprised. She smiled. "When I can afford the groceries, yes. Do you want some?" He hesitated, then nodded. They ate at the small counter instead of the formal dining room. For the first time, it felt like a home and not a contract. Later that night, Alexander received a call that made his expression darken. Emily watched as his shoulders tensed and his tone turned sharp. When he hung up, she asked softly, "Bad news?" He looked at her for a long moment before answering. "An investor is threatening to back out. He thinks our marriage is a publicity stunt." Emily's stomach dropped. "Is it not?" she asked carefully. "It was," he admitted, until it stopped feeling like one. The words hung in the air, heavy and dangerous. She did not know how to respond, and before she could, the doorbell rang. Standing in the foyer was Victoria Lane, Alexander's ex-girlfriend and one of the company's PR consultants. Tall, elegant, and clearly comfortable in his world, she smiled at Emily with polite sharpness. "So, this is the new Mrs. Hayes," she said smoothly. "I must say, you clean up well." Alexander's tone hardened. "Victoria, what do you want?" She shrugged. "Just doing my job. The press caught photos of your little getaway. People are asking questions." Her eyes flicked to Emily. "You might want to coach your wife before she accidentally says something unhelpful." Emily felt heat rush to her cheeks. Alexander stepped forward, his voice low. "That will be enough." Victoria smirked and left, her perfume lingering in the air long after the door closed. Emily turned away, embarrassed and furious. "She is right, you know," she said quietly. "I do not belong in your world. I never did." "Do not say that," Alexander replied, but his voice carried hesitation, and that hesitation hurt more than words. That night, Emily packed a small bag, unable to stay in a house where she felt like a liability. When Alexander found her near the stairs, suitcase in hand, his voice broke the silence. "Where are you going?" "Somewhere that does not remind me I am pretending," she said. "You said it yourself, this marriage ends after the gala. Maybe it is better if we end it early." He took a step closer, his expression torn between pride and panic. "Emily, please, this is not just about business anymore." "Then what is it?" she demanded. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, unable to find the words. That was her answer. Emily walked past him, her footsteps echoing through the marble hall. When the door shut behind her, the silence that followed was louder than any argument. The next few days were a blur. She moved into a small apartment above a bookstore, the kind of place where no one knew her name. She found part-time work arranging flowers for events and tried not to check the news, but Alexander was everywhere. Every headline mentioned his upcoming gala, every photo showed him alone. At night, she told herself she had done the right thing, but the ache in her chest said otherwise. One evening, as she was closing the shop, she saw a black car parked across the street. Alexander stepped out, the rain soaking through his coat. He walked straight toward her, ignoring the umbrella she tried to offer. "You left without giving me a chance to explain," he said, his voice hoarse from the cold. "You had your chance," she replied. "You could have told me what I meant to you, but you did not." "Because I did not know how," he admitted. "I have built everything in my life through control, through logic, but you," he stopped, his voice breaking. "You are the one thing I cannot control, and it terrifies me." For a long moment, neither moved. Then Emily whispered, "The contract ends in 3 days." "Then let us make the most of those 3 days," he said. She looked at him, the man she was never meant to love, and nodded slowly. They stood together under the rain, and for the first time, the idea of pretending felt impossible. The rain that night seemed endless, washing the city in silver light as Alexander stood outside Emily's small apartment. When she finally let him in, both of them were soaked, their breaths unsteady. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Alexander said quietly, "I did not come here to argue. I came because the gala is in 2 days, and I need you there." Emily crossed her arms, her voice calm but tired. "You mean you need your wife there?" He met her eyes. "No, Emily. I need you. Those words broke something open inside her, but she still looked away. What happens after that night, Alexander? When the contract ends? He exhaled, running a hand through his wet hair. That is what I am trying to figure out. The next evening, they returned to the mansion to prepare for the gala. The staff moved briskly, arranging flowers, checking lighting, and polishing every surface until it shone. Emily wandered through the ballroom, feeling both familiar and foreign. It was the same place where she had stood beside him pretending to be someone else. Only now, the pretending felt less like a lie and more like a memory. Alexander found her standing by the grand piano. You look nervous, he said softly. You have seen what happens when I get nervous, she replied, trying to smile. I bid $100,000 on a painting. He laughed quietly, the sound genuine. That was the night I realized you were not afraid of me. Maybe I should have been, she said, but her voice carried affection rather than fear. On the night of the gala, the mansion transformed into a spectacle of lights and luxury. Guests in glittering gowns and tailored suits filled the hall, champagne flowing like liquid gold. Reporters lined the entrance, cameras flashing as Alexander and Emily stepped out of the car. She wore a silver gown that shimmered with every step, and his gaze lingered on her longer than it should have. Are you ready for this? He asked. No, she admitted, but let us pretend I am. Inside, the event began smoothly. Speeches were made, donations announced, laughter and applause echoing across the marble floor. Emily stayed close to Alexander, smiling when expected, nodding politely, and keeping her composure. But halfway through the evening, the lights dimmed for a video presentation, an annual tradition celebrating the company's success. What appeared on the screen, however, made Emily's blood run cold. The video showed a series of images, her face, the contract signed months ago, and headlines suggesting the marriage had been fabricated to boost the company's public image. The room fell silent. Then whispers began, sharp and cruel. Emily turned to Alexander, her voice trembling. What is this? Before he could answer, Victoria appeared near the stage, her expression triumphant. Seems the truth finally came out, she said loudly. Congratulations, Mr. Hayes. Your little act fooled us all. Reporters surged forward, flashes exploding like lightning. Emily stepped back, tears burning her eyes. Did you know about this? She asked. Alexander shook his head, fury darkening his features. No. I swear I did not. But it is true, is it not? She whispered. At least it was. She turned to leave, but he caught her hand. Emily, please, listen to me. Do not, she said, pulling away. Not here. Not now. She ran from the ballroom, the murmurs following her like a storm. Outside, the rain had returned, cold and relentless. Emily stood beneath the awning, her silver gown clinging to her skin. She could hear the chaos inside, the noise of cameras, the voices demanding answers. Then Alexander appeared behind her, his tie undone, his expression shattered. They set us up, he said. Someone leaked the contract to destroy me. And you dragged me down with you, she replied, her voice breaking. All this time, I thought maybe we were becoming something real. But it was always a performance. No, Emily, he said, stepping closer. It stopped being a performance the moment you walked into my life. I did not expect you. I did not deserve you. But you made me remember what being human feels like. Her tears mixed with the rain. Then prove it, she whispered. Not to them. To me. Alexander looked at her, the weight of everything he had hidden pressing against his chest. I will, he said. I promise you, I will. She turned away, her heart torn between belief and betrayal. Behind them, the sound of the gala faded into the distance. For the first time since the contract began, nothing about their story was scripted. And as lightning flashed across the sky, Emily realized that love, when tested by truth, was the most dangerous kind of contract of all. The next morning, the headlines were everywhere. Fake marriage scandal rocks Hayes International. Every news outlet replayed the footage from the Goliath contract, the whispers, the humiliation. Emily stayed hidden in her apartment, unable to face the world. Her phone buzzed nonstop, messages from reporters, strangers, even old co-workers. She ignored them all. The only call she answered was from Carol, her mother's nurse, who told her that the clinic had received a mysterious donation covering all remaining medical bills. Emily knew immediately who it was. Alexander. Yet she could not bring herself to call him. Somewhere in the chaos of her heartbreak, she still feared that his kindness came from guilt, not love. Meanwhile, at the Hayes headquarters, Alexander stood before the board of directors, his reputation on the line. Cameras were banned, but the room was full of tension. One of the older board members leaned forward. "Do you deny it?" Alexander's voice was steady but low. "I deny that it was fake. The contract existed, yes, but what happened afterward was not something I could control." "You brought shame to this company," another said sharply. "Step down before the shareholders demand it." Alexander looked around the table, his jaw firm. "I will not step down. Hayes International was built on my father's ambition, but I intend to lead it with integrity. I take full responsibility, and I will make this right." Outside, reporters swarmed, shouting questions, but Alexander ignored them all. That evening, he went to Emily's apartment. She opened the door halfway, surprise flickering in her tired eyes. "Why are you here?" she asked. "To tell you the truth," he said. "I found out who leaked the contract. It was Victoria. She had access to company records and used them to destroy us both." Emily looked at him in disbelief. "Why would she do that?" "Because I ended things with her for good. She thought if she could ruin us, she could control what was left." Emily shook her head. "It does not change what people believe." "Then let me change it," Alexander said. "There is a press conference tomorrow. I will tell them everything, the truth about the contract, and what you mean to me." She stared at him, torn between hope and fear. "If you do that, you risk everything." He stepped closer, his eyes unwavering. "I already did when I fell in love with you." Her breath caught, and for the first time in days, tears filled her eyes, not from pain, but from something fragile and real. "You cannot fix this with a speech, Alexander." "Maybe not," he said, "but I can start with honesty." He left her standing in the doorway, the sound of the rain returning outside. The next day, Alexander stood at the podium facing a wall of cameras. His statement began simple and direct. "Yes, the contract was real. I asked Emily Carter to marry me for business reasons, but somewhere along the way, it became something far more important. She reminded me that leadership is not about image, it is about truth." The reporters erupted with questions, flashes exploding like stars. But Alexander's voice remained calm. "If you want to blame someone, blame me. She did nothing wrong except believe in a man who did not deserve her trust." The conference ended, and the story that had once been his downfall began to shift. Across the city, Emily watched the broadcast with trembling hands. For the first time, she saw him not as the untouchable CEO, but as a man willing to lose everything for honesty. And for love. She whispered his name, a tear slipping down her cheek, realizing that maybe, just maybe, it was not too late for them after all. The fallout from the press conference changed everything. Overnight, the story shifted from scandal to redemption. Headlines now read, "CEO admits contract marriage, defends woman he loves." Public sympathy began to turn, not just toward Alexander but toward Emily, whose quiet dignity throughout the chaos had touched people. The company's stock even began to recover. But for Alexander, the victory meant nothing without her. He had not seen Emily since that day outside her apartment, and every night, the silence felt heavier. He replayed every word she had said, every look she had given him, realizing too late how much truth she had carried in her quiet strength. 3 days later, a small envelope arrived at Emily's apartment. Inside was a single card with elegant handwriting. Tomorrow, at noon, at the Hayes Art Gallery. Please come. She almost tore it apart, afraid it would hurt to hope again, but curiosity and something softer urged her to go. The next day, the gallery was empty except for a few staff members arranging a new exhibit. When she stepped inside, her breath caught. The walls were lined with paintings, flowers, city streets, sunlight through glass, each one signed by her. They were her sketches, the ones she had made in private, never meant for anyone to see. Above the entrance hung a silver plaque that read, "The Art of Emily Carter." For a moment, she could not breathe. Then Alexander appeared from the back of the room, no suit this time, just a dark sweater and tired eyes. "You kept your drawings," she whispered. "I did more than that," he said. "I built this exhibit in your name. The world needed to see what I saw the first day I met you, someone who gives beauty even when she has nothing left to give." Her eyes filled with tears. "Why are you doing this?" "Because I wanted to show you that this time, there is no contract," he said. "No business reason. No lies. Just truth." He stepped closer, holding out a folded piece of paper, the original marriage contract. "This was our beginning," he said softly. "But it will not be our end." And with that, he tore it in half. The sound echoed in the quiet room like a closing chapter. Emily looked at him, her heart trembling. "You do not have to prove anything, Alexander." "I am not proving," he said. "I am choosing. I am choosing you." For the first time, she smiled through her tears. "And if I say yes, what happens next?" His voice softened. "Then we start again, without signatures or rules. Just you and me." The silence between them was full of everything they had not said, everything they had lost and found again. Emily stepped forward and took his hand, the gesture simple but final. "Then let us start," she said. He exhaled, relief and wonder in his eyes, as if the man who had once hidden behind contracts and power had finally learned what it meant to be free. Outside, the city buzzed, unaware that inside that small gallery, two people were rewriting their story, not with ink and paper, but with forgiveness and love. 1 year later, spring returned to the city with the scent of rain and new beginnings. The Hayes Art Gallery stood brighter than ever, filled with people admiring the exhibit that had once been a confession of love. Emily walked through the crowd, greeting guests and pausing near a painting of a single white lily, her favorite. Behind her, a familiar voice said softly, "Still your favorite one?" She turned to find Alexander standing there, dressed simply, his expression warm. "It reminds me of that night," she said. "The one where everything changed." He smiled. "That night changed me too." In the months that followed the gallery opening, their story had become something of a legend, the CEO and the artist. But for them, it was never about headlines. They moved into a small townhouse near the river, far from the marble and glass of the mansion. Emily reopened her flower studio, and Alexander continued leading his company with a new kind of purposeless about power, more about people. The gala scandal that once defined them was now a story of redemption, told in whispers with admiration instead of judgment. As the evening drew on, Alexander took her hand gently. "There is one more thing I need to do," he said. He led her toward the center of the gallery, where a small group of close friends and employees had gathered. From his pocket, he pulled out a small box and knelt down on one knee. The crowd fell silent. "Emily Carter," he said, his voice steady but full of emotion, "I asked you to marry me once for all the wrong reasons. Tonight, I am asking again for the only reason that matters. Because I love you, and I cannot imagine my life without you." Tears filled her eyes as she covered her mouth. "You are serious," she whispered. "Completely," he said. "No contracts, no cameras, just us." She laughed through her tears and nodded. "Then yes," she said softly. 1,000 times, yes." Applause filled the room as Alexander slipped the ring onto her finger, a simple gold band with a single diamond, elegant and unpretentious, just like their love. The crowd cheered, but in that moment, they only saw each other. Later that night, as the gallery emptied and the city lights glimmered beyond the windows, Emily leaned her head on his shoulder. "We have come a long way from that first deal," she murmured. "The best deal I ever made," he replied. "Though I am fairly certain you got the better end of it." She smiled. "We both did." Outside, rain began to fall again, gentle and familiar, just like the night they first met. Alexander took off his coat and draped it over her shoulders, the same way he had done on their very first evening together. "To new beginnings," he said quietly. Emily looked up at him, her eyes full of light. "To love without terms," she answered. And as they walked out into the rain, hand in hand, the world that had once judged them now faded behind, leaving only what truly mattered, the promise they had built not from obligation, but from choice, from truth, and from the kind of love that no contract could ever define.